Welcome to a new planetary and seismic update. Before I go into the analysis, I would like to point out that we have stopped our activities on X, formerly Twitter, because the platform really has become unusable for our work. And this has a lot to do with the community note system. This is the moderation system. It really doesn't work for us. You can find the details on X on our account. We explained in detail why we stopped our activities there. We have expanded our activities on Facebook, on Telegram, and even on WhatsApp, where we also have started some channels. You may want to follow those channels. Links are on the website, the contact page. There are many links that you can follow. We highly recommend Facebook because our Facebook page, there is all the information in one place. But Telegram is also a very good place to follow our latest updates. Okay, let's have a look at the SGI graph from the previous time frame. Remember, we had critical geometry, especially the right angle geometry with Mercury, Venus and Uranus. If you look at the SGI graph, magnitude 5.5 and larger, we see some stronger earthquakes, and as minimal clustering occurred right on the 29th with that critical geometry. Again, you can look up the previous update for a detailed analysis of that geometry. Right there, two strong earthquakes, 5.7 and magnitude 6. And we had a 5.7 at Fiji on the 31st, followed by 5.6 south of Alaska. And that deserves attention because south of Alaska, that 5.6 occurred at the Shumaji Gap. Am I pronouncing this correctly? The Shumaji Gap, sorry. That is a gap that has not ruptured in a very, very long time, maybe even more than 3,000 years. There are two pockets on the right and to the left of that gap, and that ruptured in 1938 and in 1946, but they are relatively small compared to the pockets further to the left, and also Alaska 1964. There was a great rupture zone, but in 1938 and 1946, that wasn't all that much, relatively speaking, of course, but there is that Shumaji Gap in between. And that area could very well be one of the next regions for a megathrust earthquake, and then we're talking about magnitude 8.5 or larger. And you can also find this information in the latest updates on our channels. So that's the 5.6 south of Alaska. Then we had a very strong earthquake in Mindanao, Philippines, and that's when we entered the really critical geometry. Remember, I didn't know what geometry would actually have the larger earthquake. Would it be the 29th, following the 29th, or this geometry on the 2nd and 4th? Well, apparently we had the larger earthquake on the 4th, 6.8, followed by 6.3 the next day. And that just followed on this right angle geometry of Venus, Mercury and Uranus. So far, not a 7.5, mid-7 magnitude that we often see with this geometry. But this was an obvious seismic response nonetheless. And we are not out of the woods yet, and I will explain in a minute. We had the new moon on the 4th and a 5.5 on the central mid-Atlantic ridge. So overall, not all that much activity, but we did have a strong one in the Philippines. Okay, so let's have a look at the coming time frame. That's from the 6th to the 15th. And we have a convergence coming up on 7-8 August. And that's one that deserves attention because Venus is involved in there, Venus-Sun with Neptune, and that's not one that we should underestimate. I have one example off the top of my head. That is in September 2018, a magnitude 7.5 earthquake in Indonesia on the 28th of September, and that caused quite a tsunami. And that occurred 2 days after Venus was in a conjunction with the Sun and Neptune, and that was preceded by a convergence of critical geometry. So Venus in conjunction, or let's say connected to outer planets with specific geometry, that is always something to keep an eye on. And we're going to have that geometry on the 7th, and it is almost immediately followed with Venus-Mercury in a conjunction with Earth. Those two conjunctions, they basically occur at the same time. There are only several hours in between, and there's also, at the same time, lunar geometry that we also should not underestimate. That's Moon, Earth with Saturn, and especially Moon, Earth, Neptune, that just follows on Venus, Mercury, Earth. Because the Moon in a conjunction or opposition with Neptune, in this case, comes after Venus, Sun, Neptune. So there could be an obvious seismic response, maybe quite a strong shake probably around the 9th. Could be later on the 8th if it arrives early, could be on the 10th if it arrives a bit late, but I'd say around the 9th we should be on watch for potential larger tremor because of that planetary and lunar geometry, that convergence. In the solar system we see this convergence, Venus, Sun with Neptune, and then also Venus, Mercury and Earth. Venus, Mercury both are involved, so be on watch there. And then we see the lunar geometry of Saturn and Neptune. It doesn't look like much, only 4 conjunctions, but we have Mercury and Venus in there, with the Moon in there. These are all the ingredients for obvious seismic response. It could be multiple stronger tremors approaching magnitude 6, could be into the 6 magnitude range, and maybe even stronger. And I'd say most critical is probably around the 9th. So keep that in mind. I would also like to point out that because of this right angle geometry that we had with Venus, Mercury and Uranus on the 2nd and 4th, that has so far not produced a major or mid-7 magnitude earthquake. If we look at this version of the SGI graph, we go a few days back from the 2nd to the 10th, and we see that right angle geometry on the 2nd and on the 4th, and then we see that planetary and lunar geometry on the 7th and 8th. And if that's a whole picture there, and it is very well possible, again, that we could have an obvious seismic response around the 9th. This is the complete picture that we really should look at. There is still the potential for a bigger one, and it could very well be following that geometry on 7-8 August. Okay. Let's get back to the SGI graph. We have some critical geometry on the 10th, Venus, Mercury and Mars at a semi-right angle, and also Mercury at a right angle with Venus and Jupiter. Could be some seismic response there, but probably not much. And then also we have on the 13th, 14th, Venus, Mercury, Saturn, in a conjunction, and also some lunar geometry coming up with Uranus, Mars and Jupiter. That's the cluster of lunar conjunctions that we've seen recently, and that's because Mars, Jupiter and Uranus are grouped in the same regional space as seen from the Earth. And we could see a seismic response there following that lunar geometry. And we have Earth, Mars and Jupiter finally on the 14th in a conjunction as well. And there's also sort of a convergence there. There could be an obvious seismic response coming up. August 2024 is a critical month, and we do have some indications that there is the potential for a megathrust earthquake, and we're talking about 8.5 or larger. And this is not a message to scare anyone, but these are the indications that we have. And there are 2 dates in particular that I would like to emphasize here. That is the 9th and the 20th, and we're not there yet because the 20th will follows on very critical geometry on the 18th and 19th. There's a very critical convergence there that I will cover in the next update, but just keep in mind that we are entering now about 2 weeks that is going to be pretty critical, and there is the potential for a really big earthquake. It very much depends on the stress levels in Earth's crust, whether or not that is going to happen, but we should not underestimate that. Again, the 9th maybe, but I would say the 20th is maybe more critical, but it depends on what's going to happen in the coming week. Okay, let's have a look at atmospheric fluctuations, because we've been working very hard on getting our sensors right again. They were not really right from May to July, and we've been working hard on that. It looks like we are back on track. We've seen some seismic response following atmospheric fluctuations, and going over a couple of them. You can look up the website and also our channels on Facebook, Telegram and WhatsApp. We have dedicated channels for this atmospheric updates. So on the 2nd of August, we had fluctuations marking regions along the west coast of North America, Central America, Mexico, and the southern tip of South America. You see stars at the top right, and that's what we have been introducing this month. We have a yellow, that's pretty much code yellow, and that's moderate. And then we have orange, which is strong, and then we have red, and that is really strong, critical. Potentially. Remember, we still cannot measure the stress levels in Earth's crust, so this is some indication, but it isn't perfect. And we see those 3 stars with the next fluctuations on the 3rd of August, marking regions at the South Sandwich Islands. Could be due, like I said in the previous update, it could be due for a large earthquake, could be higher 6 to 7 magnitude. And then we had on the 3rd of August also marking regions over Africa, Italy in particular, and maybe near Iceland. Italy already had a magnitude 5 earthquake on in the south, and that was preceded by a fluctuation on the 28th of July. It was not a really critical fluctuation. It looked moderate, but there was magnitude 5, and well, southern Italy doesn't have magnitude 5 earthquakes all the time, so that seemed like an obvious response there. And then yesterday, again, near the west coast of North America, an obvious atmospheric peak that we actually detected, and this has actually been going on since the 28th of July. Obvious atmospheric fluctuations marking regions Central America, Mexico, and especially to the north. That could be California, Cascadia, or even near Alaska. And not sure if those fluctuations are really significant, but in any case, be on extra alert there. Like I said, this month is critical. There can be a megafrost earthquake according to the indications that we have. And well, the west coast, especially Cascadia, and even more so this Chemagian Gap south of Alaska, it could be due for a big one. So this is a heads up, be on extra alert just in case. You will find more atmospheric fluctuations on the website, of course, and also in our social media. It's really worth watching these updates. And we also do short reports on the channel on Facebook and Telegram, where we actually compare the fluctuations with actual seismic activity. Check out the website for the latest updates, of course. Stay safe. Until next time.